Thank you so much for having me here today. I'm really excited to talk to you about a topic which means a great deal to me personally. As Jim mentioned, before I became a strategy consultant at Bain, I was a high school math teacher. And I loved teaching. I loved my students. I loved the challenge. And I loved the impact that I felt that I was having on their lives. I'm in there. I'm hard to see because I'm short, but I was in there. And I was a pretty good teacher. I showed up every day, and I worked really hard, and I cared an awful lot. My students thought that I was tough, but their parents were happy. And importantly, no one was banging down the principal's door trying to get their kid out of my class. So the leadership at my school pretty much left me alone. They had other fires, and sometimes at my school those were literal fires, but they had other fires that needed putting out. So I loved teaching, but I left. I left because at the time, it didn't feel like a profession in which I could grow and progress. It felt static. I didn't want to spend my life counting down the days until June, which is what I saw so many of the veteran teachers around me doing. And I wasn't all that excited by the career path that was open to me, teacher to department chair to AP to principal. From where I sat, the principal seemed pretty far removed from teaching, which is what I loved, and she also seemed pretty miserable. So I did what so many other teachers do. I left the classroom. I've had the privilege at Bain to examine why those things that I needed, the ability to sit down with someone who could help me get better at my job, tell me that I could be better, and then help me on that journey. The ability to feel like I was working on a team. And the opportunity to have a path forward that was exciting and viable. Why those things that I needed to stay in teaching, why they didn't exist for me, and why they don't exist for so many other teachers today. We worked with 12 CMOs and districts across the country, and we did a nationwide survey to understand how school models today are set up and how those models impact the teachers and the teaching and learning that's happening in their classrooms. And what we found is that most schools, like the school that I taught at, are set up like the school on the left-hand side of this page, where the vast majority of instructional leadership responsibilities rest on the shoulders of the principal. And sometimes, depending on the size of the school and the funding model in the state, there might be an AP and there might be 2 APs. But generally what we found is that the vast majority of the instructional leadership responsibilities rest on the shoulders of the principal. And principals feel that. 96% of the principals in our survey told us that they feel responsible for the development and growth of the teachers that they lead. And 4 out of 5 of them told us that they were the primary person responsible for the development and growth of the teachers that they lead. And then we asked them, well, what does that mean? What does it mean to be responsible for the development and growth of the teachers that you lead? And they gave us this tremendously long list of instructional leadership responsibilities that rested solely on them, in addition to the operational responsibilities that they had on their plate to run their school. And then we asked them, well, how many teachers are you responsible for? And the average principal in our data was responsible for nearly 40 teachers. And when you add to that the non-instructional staff that report into the teachers in the school, on average about 10 people, the average principal in our data is managing almost 50 people. And we know from our work with our corporate clients that this really only happens in education, those kinds of numbers. And what we also know is that practically, most of those teachers aren't actually being managed, and that's what I experienced. They're fine, so they are left alone. And so then we started to dig into what that feels like for teachers, and we asked them a whole bunch of questions about the support and the development opportunities they get. We asked about feedback that they get, observations, evaluation, opportunities to collaborate with their peers, the PD that they get. And for the most part, teachers were fairly unsatisfied with it. And when we dug into why, and we talked to teachers in focus groups, and we looked at their responses on the survey, the write-in responses on the survey, it came down to the depth of support that they were getting. And the fact that their leaders just simply don't have time to dig in with their teachers and give them the on-the-job development and support that they so richly deserve. And all that nets out to what we know to be true, and this comes from TNTP's research actually, that only 3 out of 10 of our teachers actually do improve over time. And when you feel like your leader isn't investing in you, you're not that happy. And when we ask teachers, would you recommend working in your school to a qualified friend or colleague? Teachers tell us that they are pretty much more unsatisfied than any other group of employees out there. And it's very, very hard to recruit and retain people into a profession that looks like that. When we take that same question, how likely are you to recommend working in your school to a friend or colleague, and we cut it by the frequency of feedback that the teachers receive. So over here on the left-hand side, we have teachers who say that they're getting no feedback at all the way over to, on the right-hand side, teachers who say that they're getting feedback at least once a week. We can see that the teachers who are getting the support that they need to thrive in their jobs are also the most satisfied. So the good news is that districts are recognizing this problem, and they are adding leadership capacity. And sometimes they're doing this because they feel that they see that their principals are stretched too thin, the administrators are stretched too thin. More often, they're doing it because they want to provide ways for their teachers to continue to progress in their careers while also staying in the classroom. But they're adding leadership capacity. So just to illustrate this point, for example, one of the districts that we worked with as we did this study, for every one principal in the school, there were on average 12 other leaders in the building. And that's great. But when you ask those leaders what they're doing, for the most part, they're facilitating meetings. That's what they say that they do as leaders. And it makes sense, right? Because you're taking your best teachers and you want to hold on to them. So you give them a title and hopefully you kick a stipend their way and you maybe give them some release time if you can swing it. But God forbid you give them any extra work, because what you're trying to do is retain them. You don't want to burn them out. That would negate the whole purpose of the whole thing. So we have them facilitating meetings. But when you don't give people responsibility, they don't feel responsible. So only 1 out of 5 teacher leaders that we had in our survey told us that they felt responsible for the performance and growth of the teachers on their team. And only 1 out of 10 told us that they were the primary person responsible. So I want to pause here for a second, because we all know here in the United States the sort of story of the bad boss, right? We've seen the Dilbert cartoons. But I want to ask you in this audience, how many of you have ever had a great boss? I've had a great boss, right? And for me, A great boss is someone who takes you under their wing and says, I see you getting better at this job, and I am going to partner with you to make sure that it happens. I'm going to work with you to make sure that it happens. A great boss is also someone who takes the team that you're on and really makes it hum. Make sure that when you're working with that team, that work makes sense and that you guys are collaborating and moving forward. And a great boss is also someone that you can see yourself becoming, right? You can say, I want to be in that person's shoes, and as they move forward, I'm going to move forward with them. This picture is not a picture of a great boss, right? This is someone who says, oh, your development? No, that's not what I'm here for. I'm here to just facilitate the meeting that we sit in every week. That's my job. But we're not giving those teacher leaders responsibility, and we're certainly not setting them up to take on responsibility. So 2/3 of the teacher leaders in our data told us that they received neither a stipend nor release time. So even if we wanted them to do more, we're not really setting them up to do that. So that all isn't really great. But we do think that there is a better way. And as we traveled around the country doing our research, we talked to many school systems that are trying something different. They're trying a different school leadership model, one in which they distribute the responsibility for the development of the teachers to a talented group of educators. And those educators are given end-to-end responsibility for the development of the teachers on their teams. And when we looked at those models, and they include Denver Public Schools, they include the Opportunity Culture Schools in Charlotte, and CMOs like Green Dot, we saw 5 key principles that held those models together. They all look different. They're all doing something a little bit different. But these were the 5 key themes that we saw that those models had in common. So first, as a district, they've made a bet on a leadership model. So they might have tried a whole bunch of different options in the beginning. They might have piloted some different versions of it, and they're working out the kinks. But as a whole, at the end of the day, they committed to a unified vision of how their schools should be set up. Second, they recognized the leadership deficit that they had, and they invested in creating and strengthening their leadership capacity. And what I mean by that was that they were adding leaders. And those leaders might have been APs, they might have been teacher leaders. We saw both models, and we think that both models work. But they were adding leaders, and they, as a district, as an organization, they were investing significant resources in developing those people as leaders. Third, and really importantly, those leaders were focused on the core mission of the school, which is improving teaching and learning. So there's lots of leaders, right, that are like the, czar of cafeteria culture improvement, right? And that's all great, but that's not what we're talking about. These are leaders who are focused on improving what the school needs to do at its core, which is teaching and learning. Fourth, those leaders are leading teams of teachers, teams with a shared purpose. So whether they're grade level teams or subject matter teams, those teams are working together to get better. And fifth, and this is where sometimes I've given this presentation a bunch of times, and 1 through 4 are logical, and people are nodding their heads along with me, and I get to 5, and sometimes I start to lose people. But those leaders are truly empowered leaders with both the time and the authority to lead. And so what we mean by that is when you have full responsibility for the development of the teachers, you also need to be empowered to do that. And what we've observed is that in education, unlike just about any other industry that we have experience with, there is a belief that coaching and development should be separated from evaluation. And I think my observation is that's because the evaluation isn't always seen as a tool to help teachers get better. It's seen as a tool to measure how they are as teachers, to pinpoint where the talent is, and to understand the spread of talent, but it's not seen as a tool to help you get better. And what we know from our work with organizations across many, many different industries is that the best organizations see evaluation as a tool to help their people, help their talent improve. And so we believe that those two things, coaching and development and evaluation, should come back together. It's still early days on the models that we saw, but we think that the early indications are very, very promising. So for instance, in Denver, 89% of teachers there told the Denver Public Schools that their teaching practice had improved as a result of working with their team lead. And 85% of them said that their team lead was successful at both coaching and evaluation. As I did this research, and I traveled all around the country, and I sat in schools all over the country and talked to teachers, and I listened to them talk about the distributed leadership models in their schools. And it was messy, and sometimes the process of getting there and the process of change had been pretty ugly, and it wasn't always a clean, easy story. But as I listened to them talk about the opportunities that they had to improve as teachers, about the work that they did on their teams, and about the exciting career paths that they saw in front of them, I was envious. I could have been one of them, but I did not have that opportunity to improve, and I didn't have the opportunity to work on a team. And I didn't have a career path in front of me that felt exciting and felt meaningful. So I did what so many other teachers do. I left the classroom. We think that there is a better way. Thank you very much.